Good afternoon and welcome to ShareSoc's 2020 AGM. Very late in the year, partly as a result of the COVID pandemic and partly as a result of my workload, I'm afraid. So I do appreciate all of you joining us on New Year's Eve. It does give me the opportunity at the end to wish you a happy new year. Just a little bit of housekeeping in terms of the way that this will work. If you wish to ask questions, there is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. If you press that, you will be able to write a question, which I'll see. And at the end of the presentations, we will run through members' questions. The intention will be to answer all of them if we can. I've allowed 90 minutes for this session. It could be that we finish earlier if there are relatively few questions. If there are questions that take us beyond the 90 minutes, then I may have to give written responses to some of those. The chat function, I'm afraid, is disabled, and that is intentional. We find that in webinars, the chat function distracts people from listening to the presentations. So the only button that's available to you today is Q&A. I'm going to open proceedings with, we have 35 participants. I'm going to open proceedings today with the chairman's report, which you all should have received. I'm then going to introduce you to those directors that have joined since our last AGM, which are Paul de Gruchy, Ray Williams, and Karen Schulte. I'm then going to ask three in this case, because I'm afraid Karen Schulte can't join us today, directors to provide brief updates on the areas of policy, education, events, and Signet. I'll then announce the winner of the Stan Grierson Annual Award. We will look to take members' questions, and then we will move to voting process. The voting will be via poll on screen. 3 options for each: for, against, or abstain. You don't have to vote. If you have registered a vote through a proxy and have registered to attend the AGM, then I will ignore your proxy, the vote received via proxy, and will only count the voting through the poll system today. As advised, we will add the proxy votes to the on-screen votes to arrive at a final vote on each resolution. Thank you. I'm going to ask the directors to, open up their screens, please. Thank you. We are minus 2 directors today: Karen Schulte, who was an advised absentee, and David Strader, who may have been caught out by the technology. We're not quite certain, so he may join at a later stage. Moving to chairman's. Sorry, and Paul de Gruchy also, who was a potential non-availability today, and I'm assuming that means a real non-availability. Chairman's report. This report, remember, is for 2019, but I'll make comments over 2020 because 2020 has been such a strange year on the way through. 2019, we experienced a fall in turnover and an increase in expenses. The fall in turnover for 2019 was primarily because there was little by way of campaigning activity in that particular year. Campaigns tend to build our turnover figures and to produce a degree of reserves. And there was none of that in 2019. 2020, campaigning activity has returned, and we've seen both the Sirius shareholder group, and we've seen the SVS campaign, and more recently we've seen a Woodford campaign, all of which have been positive, both in terms of membership and in terms of turnover. The results for 2019 was a loss of £6,439, leaving your organisation, your society, with reserves of £38,851. That was accompanied by a cash balance, which is a pretty good indicator of reserves, of around £41,000. Just as an indicator of where we are coming into the tail end of 2020, the cash balance sits at around £38,000, and I would expect, for various reasons, a small increase in reserves over the year. Directors and patron, your board increased to 11 in 2019 and then to 12 people in 2020. We added Penny Shepherd, Amit Badara, Paul de Gruchy and Ray Williams in 2019, and we added Karen Schulte in May of 2020. The board is unpaid. The activities of the society are to a very large extent reliant on the activities of the board that is in front of you. We do have a very small contingent of paid staff, but the majority of our activities are driven by directors and by non-director volunteers. And I need to cast a vote of thanks to all of my fellow directors for their activities during both 2019 and 2020. The amount of involvement and activity behind the scenes is absolutely huge, and it never fails to surprise me how much work people are prepared to do for zero recompense, simply because they believe in what we're trying to do. It's very heartening indeed. I also like to extend my thanks to Lord Lee of Trafford, John Lee of the FT, as many of you know him. John is invaluable as a source of knowledge and information. He's invaluable as a route into the various bodies of government for us, and he is an endless source of support for ShareSoc in its activities. I'm not going to cover member services in my report because it is written and because you're going to hear from the relevant directors. What you're going to hear about is the things that, again, are front and center in terms of providing services to and on behalf of members. What you're not going to hear about is the behind the scenes activity, the infrastructure and marketing processes, which are critical to our functioning, but which aren't perhaps as visible to members. And again, I need to express my thanks. We divided our activities down into subcommittees, 6 subcommittees, and those subcommittees have taken delegated pieces of work and focus and have spent a huge amount of time wrestling with them, thinking about them, and making recommendations back to the board as to how we go forward. And that's been invaluable, particularly in the COVID environment. I'll mention briefly AXA and Signet. At the last AGM, we talked about 2 potential mergers. The larger of the 2 was with AXA, our sister company, from whom ShareSoc split in 2011, and we attempted a rapprochement to bring ourselves back as a single organization. A lot of time and effort, a huge amount of time and effort was spent on that process, and it was very frustrating when eventually the board of UXA decided that it didn't want to proceed, which was somewhat confusing given that they had previously indicated that they did want to proceed. Frustration aside, it is what it is, and so we continue as a standalone organisation, and UXA continues as a standalone organisation. We do continue to cooperate quite heavily, particularly in the areas of consultations and policy, but there will be no merger, at least at this stage. Better news on the Signet front. We did merge in 2019 with Signet, and Ray will give you a little overview of Signet, its activities and the integration process when he speaks to you shortly. Stan Grierson Award I will address later in the agenda, and I'd just like again to as usual to underline the fact that we depend on input from members as well as input from directors and our administrative staff. Whether you have stories to give us, whether you have time to devote, many of you come to the events when we have physical events, and Man stands for us and the likes. Anything that you can do to assist us in carrying out our responsibilities is always greatly appreciated, as is your continued membership and your interest in ShareSoc as a society. That ends the Chairman's report. I'm now going to introduce the three directors who have been brought on board since the last AGM, first of which is Paul de Gruchy, who, as I mentioned, is not, I'm afraid, here today. Paul has a background in law. He was head of legal at BNP Paribas Offshore. He was involved in the development of financial services policy and legislation in Jersey. He is a non-executive director of GCP Infrastructure Partners, a FTSE 250 firm and investment company. And he is an avid personal investor. Paul's legal background fills a very defined skills gap that we were aware of, and his addition to the board is extremely welcome. The second new introduction is Ray Williams. Ray joins with and from Signet. Ray's background is in the pharmaceutical industry. He's led Signet since 2018. He guided the group through the merger with ShareSoc, and he has been investing personally since 1984 with the BT privatization. And again, a very welcome addition. Both Ray and the Signet activity that he brings with him are very welcome additions to our offering. The third, and again, I'm afraid not available to speak to you directly today, is Karen Schulte. Karen Schulte's background is global logistics, investment banking, and private equity, mostly in Asia for a period of around 25 years. Karen brings a very welcome focus on education. Education is core to what we do, but it's a very complicated area and one that is difficult to address and difficult to know how to resource and how to approach. And Karen has brought a very welcome focus on that. And you'll hear a little bit about the existing masterclasses and developments and the thought process going forward. That will be read to you by Cliff Waite in Karen's absence. Karen has been an active investor in listed and unlisted companies. I'm going to move now to the Stan Grierson. Sorry, I'm going to move now to the directors' individual presentations. The first of which is in the area of policy, and will be given to you by Cliff Waite. And so, if we could have the slide, please, and if non-presenting directors could kill their videos and sound for the time being, please.
Good afternoon. I can report it's been another very busy year working on your behalf. Nominees or shareholder rights is probably our core and key policy campaigning area. It's all about the disenfranchisement of individual investors. This year has seen the Law Commission publish a report which has given us great hope. The Law Commission report identified the issues very, very clearly about investors not owning shares. If you own by a nominee, it is the nominee who is the member of the company and not you. Information rights, like knowing about an AGM or shareholders circular, and voting rights, voting at AGMs, general meetings, they're only passed to you optionally by the nominee, by the platform. And in an administration, there's a problem about who really owns the shares. Our preferred approach is to have the name on the register of the individual investor. And this is one of the issue items and proposals that the Law Commission has reviewed and considered, and we'll be continuing to press this. Interestingly, the FRC has given a nudge towards a helpful solution, or an idea anyway, that companies should collect the email addresses of all of their investors so that they can communicate with them directly. That would be a good thing. Placings is another area where individual investors do not get a fair deal. Too often they're excluded. The preemption group allowed up to 20% in the COVID crisis of dilution. They've now gone back to the old levels. Now, I'm happy to report that there's been huge progress in this area. Primary Bid, we've been working very closely with, and they have introduced a facility for individual investors to participate in placings. And now that is seen as the norm. Unfortunately, there's an EU limit of 8 million euros, but that at least is something. And usually companies are willing to reserve around 10% up to, for individual investors up to that limit. We're now lobbying strongly to remove that 8 million euro limit, and also to have no prospectus for placings. That's an unnecessary piece of legislation, we think, at the moment. That needs to be removed. The special administration regime has cost the 57 million in the case of Beaufort, where PwC were appointed the administrators, and there were only 500 million of assets. 57 million, this is a national scandal. It's an astounding amount of money. The FCA did not act early enough. They delayed the administration and announcing their decision because of SEC in the States, who were trying to prosecute some people. And the bailout is being paid by the FSCS. And of course, who pays for the FSCS? At the end of the day, it all goes around, it comes back to the investors. We also respond to all the consultations from the government, BEIS, FRC, FCA. And this year we did 7. In February on market structures and trading hours, and also on the FRC draft plan and budget. In August, on capital gains tax, the principles of a reform, and then a more detailed response in October. Also in October, we responded on stamp duty. And again in October, the regulatory frameworks for the approval of financial promotions. This sounds boring, but financial promotions by unauthorized firms are allowed and are causing chaos. And so that's one area behind the scenes where we've done quite a bit of work. A massive amount of work went into consumer investment markets. 49-page response was made, and the FCA is not doing enough to ensure individual investors are fairly treated, and that ensuring that individual investors are not exploited by the financial services industry. The UK listing rules are being consulted on at the moment, and we have recommended the FCA should regulate the AIM market in future, not the London Stock Exchange. And also that the standard should not be made easier, which is what Rishi Sunak seems to be encouraging or in favour of. We think they should be held the same or made tougher. We want to stop future scandals, and we think that the standards they've got at the moment should be properly enforced. Have the next slide, please. The two big campaigns we did this year were in terms of Woodford and Sirius. In Sirius, in April 19, there was a fundraise of 400 million at 15p. And then in January 2020, the company was taken over by Anglo American for 5.5p. Altogether, there was a billion plus of shareholder funds which were lost. In Woodford, $1 billion of investments were lost when the funds were closed. ShareSoc has a track record of success in campaigns. And I'd just like to dwell on this a little moment. The Royal Bank of Scotland, where they were not listening to shareholders, we got our shareholder resolution on the AGM agenda, and we forced them to have regular meetings and engage with retail shareholders. At Aviva, they were forced to U-turn on their plan to buy out their irredeemable preference shares at below market value. At Unilever, they had to abandon plans to move their headquarters. At Sirius Minerals, we got meetings between unhappy shareholders and the company and with Anglo American. And also at Sirius, we got the Law Commission, the Minister, and a High Court judge to acknowledge the problems of people who who hold shares via nominees. At Edge, we requisitioned shareholder resolutions, and we got an independent director appointed. At Albion, we negotiated a reduction in fees. At Beaufort, PwC had proposed 100 million of fees to resolve the frozen accounts, and we got this significantly reduced. At SVS, investors have had their investments frozen, and we are currently working to resolve many practical problems so that members can access their funds as quickly as possible. We are the only organisation that runs this type of campaign. The reason we can do this is because we have so many of the pieces of the jigsaw in place, and I call it a jigsaw. We can help communications via our forums, which require both software and practical implementation experience. We have the know-how and track record of success. We are recognised now as a powerful shareholder organisation. Our strong press links enable us to put forward key points, such as in the Investors Chronicle today. We can mobilise MPs via letter writing campaigns, such as we did at Sirius. We also have able directors and volunteers. We have the project management skills to get things done. We are not just a talking shop. We have established links and access to key influencers in government, the FCA, FRC, BEIS, London Stock Exchange. And we can bring on board partners like Lead A where necessary. These are all pieces of the jigsaw which we can put together. And the reason that ShareSoc is involved in the Woodford campaign is because ShareSoc is on the side of the investor. Unlike the lawyers and the providers of finance, we are not seeking to make profit. ShareSoc is a not-for-profit organisation which aims to improve the way things work on behalf of the individual investor. As we are independent, ShareSoc can be a trusted sounding board to claimants. So that's briefly an update of what's been happening on campaigns and policy issues. It's been a busy year. Moving on to education, I'd like to first of all and say a really good, great thank you to Karen Short. We've been struggling, quite honestly, for several years on the financial education front. We knew it was important, but we weren't making much progress. And Karen has come on board. She's taken this brief and she's done a lot of research, first of all, a lot of hard thinking, and she's diligently worked through it. And now she's moving on to the implementation stage, and we're beginning to see the benefits of what she's done. First of all, though, we have to thank Mark Bentley because of the ShareSoc Investor Academy. There's a link here. If you've never been to look at it, please do go and have a look at it. There's a huge amount of information in there, and you can learn quite a lot. Karen has transformed our masterclasses. We're now doing online webinar versions. We had 280 people registered for the remuneration masterclass, and that seemed to go pretty well. The private equity and shorting classes were also very, very good and very well done. I listened into those and they were, I thought, excellent. I learned a lot. And next year we have one on ESG, which is a really big hot topic of investing. And we've got that one sponsored, and that's a new, so if you go back a point, and that's pretty important that we have sponsors. So the ones for private equity and shorting weren't, so there were a limited number of people who wanted to, who were willing to pay, quite a few people willing to pay, but we think we'll be able to get more people attending and give more knowledge and more education if we make those events free in future with a sponsor. And the next slide, please. Karen did a big review of the education market. If you Google financial education, you get huge amounts of stuff. And a lot of it is really people trying to sell their own service. It's not independent. We felt that there's a gap for some independent quality advice. And so we're going to identify what we're calling a basics course. It's more than just basics. It's probably going to be half a dozen or a dozen of 30-minute videos. And we've commissioned a taster video. And so the next step is fundraising. And Karen's already been around and talked to a lot of people, including London Stock Exchange and some of the platforms and the FCA about this. And so she's establishing contacts, and there's going to be more to come on that front. So I think we've done the groundwork there, and I think next year we'll be able to tell you about a lot more progress. So thank you very much, and I'll answer questions at the end. I'll pass over now.
Thank you, Cliff. And now it's Mike Dennis, please, to introduce us to events activities.
Thanks, Cliff. Thanks, Mark. Next slide, please. Seems like a long time ago, 2019. Just a quick summary of what happened in 2019 in regard to events. We ran pre-COVID 17 small company seminars, which was one more than we had done in 2018. And that covered 65 separate company presentations in the usual locations, London, Birmingham and Manchester, as we had done in previous years. So we'd made steady progress. What we focused on in 2019 for the first time was actually company visits to primarily large caps. We kicked off work on that at the back end of 2018. And after a lot of dialogue with various companies, we managed to organise in total 8 visits in 2019. Slightly lower than we'd originally hoped to achieve in our first year, but the trend was good from 0 to 8. So we were hoping to do more this year, but for obvious reasons we haven't done. And those were primarily with FTSE 100 companies and went down very well with our membership at the time. And we aim to do an increasing number of webinars or visits with large caps in future. We had a visit to the FRC, which our usual annual visit. We also managed one physical masterclass in 2019. So all of those were organised by the team in terms of the events team and with the assistance of volunteers, etc. In total, we were somewhere in the order of 800 separate member attendances on all of those events in 2019. So reasonable years, showed good progress over the previous year, and we intended to do even more in 2020. Perhaps next slide, please. But as you know, 2020 didn't turn out to be exactly as we expected. Before COVID struck, we actually did run 3 company seminars, the traditional 4-company format type, and we also managed one physical company visit to a larger company before the shutters came down. And then there was a sort of a hiatus while we all reorganized and rejigged and retooled in order to start off webinars, and that took us a few weeks to get ourselves organized with that. Since we've got going on that, we've had in total this year 29 company webinars, and after a go round of a few of those, the feedback we got was very good from members in general, and what was quite clear was the increased geographical coverage it achieved, because we were getting plaudits from all points of the compass within the UK and even further afield about how great it was that now they had access to company webinars rather than having to get down to a meeting, a seminar in Manchester, Birmingham or London. There was no physical travel involved. So primarily, we got a lot of plaudits for that. But on the flip side, of course, it did lack the sort of social element that we achieved with the seminars. As a result of that, we introduced after meetings, just to see if we could, in the best possible way in a virtual world, replicate some of the experiences that members get after a seminar, and in terms of talking about what they've just seen and perhaps sharing information about other things. And we've done 16 of those so far this year, and they steadily become quite popular. They're a sort of Signet style approach, and plaudits here to Danny Wallace, who's organized, I think, virtually every one of those after meetings and chaired them to ensure everything went according to plan. So we intend to continue with that kind of approach. Obviously, the seminars, the webinars are not multi-company events, and we specifically chose that approach as well because other providers do often try to cram in 3 or 4 companies in one sitting. But we felt we wanted to give companies and yourselves as members time to get into some of the detail of individual companies, so give them longer to present and to give you longer to question the companies, and that seems to have gone particularly well, and again gets favorable feedback. And so we intend to continue with that approach unless we get a feedback that people would rather take a different format. In addition to all of that, the webinar format's been very useful for our campaign management, and during the year we ran 3 campaign webinars supporting Cliff and the campaign team in order to get the word out, coordinate the activities that were going on, answer questions in real time, and give everybody up-to-date information. And we'll continue to do that through supporting, for example, the latest campaign, the Woodford campaign. So we'll be continuing with campaign webinars as well, wherever they are needed and wherever the demand occurs from the membership base. And as you saw previously on Cliff's slides, we've supported 3 masterclasses in 2020 as well. And again, the webinar format's very good from that point of view. A lot of setup work from Karen involved in that, but equally the events team that support that have been able to put those together and make sure they happen technically smoothly. The promotion works, the registration process is smooth, etc. And in addition to all of that, we have had 6 other webinars, primarily organized by others. The FRC ones, we did not actually host them, but equally we had to promote them and organize the registrations in conjunction with FRC. And for the first time, we actually got an FCA webinar going, which was quite interesting for those of you dialed in, and hopefully we'll have another one next year. It's good to get off and develop a good relationship with the FCA and get our points across to them as a representative of the retail investor community. So all in all, if you look at the list there, it's been quite a busy year, and we've had somewhere in the region of, well, in fact, in excess of 3,500 total member attendances across all those virtual and physical events during the year. And our intention is to continue to grow the number of activities in 2021. So as you can imagine, there's plenty to go at in terms of companies, and we hope to replicate the masterclasses as well. One of the things we're going to try and do in 2021 as well is to define some of the events that we do more clearly as premium events, and those will be available to full paying members only, in order to differentiate more clearly the offer that we make to the full members, who we depend on in terms of the income that they generate from their subscriptions. And we feel we need to recognize that in terms of making sure that they get access to some events as premium and free of charge. We'll continue with the wider geographical reach, obviously, through the webinar process. And hopefully at some point in the year, if everything gets back to normal, we may even return to physical events as well, as seminars and so on. So watch this space. There's plenty of work going on. We've got more resource than we've ever had, and we may need more in the new year. But we only put resource in where we see the demand, and we're convinced that we can cover the cost through the revenues that we generate. I'll be answering questions, as Cliff said, later on. So Mike, thank you for listening.
Mike, thank you very much indeed. And now if Ray, please, could provide an update on Signet.
Thank you, Mark. 2019 and 2020 have been completely transformative for Signet. For those of you not familiar with Signet, Signet is completely unique in the UK. A national network of investor groups first started some 20 years ago. A Signet investor group meeting is a place where investors can go to develop their interests and meet other investors who are just as interested in investing as they are, which is not a daily occurrence, of course, in normal life. Signet groups should not be confused with investment clubs. They don't collect money for investment. Investing is left to the individual. And currently in Signet, there are 25 groups supported by a central function that provides added value through a newsletter, investor forums, and a new website, all linking together and offering the opportunity to provide national events that no individual investor in isolation could aspire to. I describe 2019 and 2020 as transformative, and that's an understatement, to put it politely. What we have experienced is, because of the pandemic, as a threat to our existence and the existence of our groups, our network. I'm very happy and glad to report that Signet is coming through all this with flying colours. But to retrace a bit, back in 2019, Signet was grappling with the need to upgrade its functions and needed to find the resources to do it. It was at this point that we became aware that ShareSoc had a similar appreciation of the value of Signet, and indeed had considered developing such a network itself. Our discussions from that led to the merger of Signet and ShareSoc in September of 2019. With the resources of ShareSoc, we've been able to revamp our organization with a new and better website, the recreation of online member forums, and a massive redevelopment of the Signet website, which is nearing completion. On top of these developments, the pandemic came as an unwelcome threat to our network, of course, as we're a group of groups meeting with people meeting in groups, sorry. We have fought this by transferring to Zoom for the time being. And in the process, we have found that not only have we kept the network together, but we've also been able to utilize the advantages of Zoom with non-geographic groups. Our specialist groups, particularly our derivatives group, SIGOPS, and our USA group, have been especially able to benefit from the ability to draw members from a wider area. All this, all this investment and activity has been rewarded by a growing membership and the creation of new groups. And the future has great opportunity for Signet. The launch of our new website, a recruitment drive amongst ShareSoc members, who are a natural constituent for Signet members, a return to local group meetings with the end of the pandemic is coming, combined with continuing use of Zoom for non-geographic meetings. That, together with recruitment at investor exhibitions when they restart and at other investor events, all point in the right direction. We're also aiming to provide extra value to our members through national Zoom events with keynote presenters. So all in all, Signet and ShareSoc fit together extremely well, and together we provide a service to investors that is second to none. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ray. And I'm going to ask the directors to open their videos again, please. What I hope you've seen is that your society, despite the ravages of COVID, is operating well, is robust, is successful, and is doing what it is here to do. One of the measures that we have of whether or not we're relevant is membership. And over the 5 years that I've been involved with ShareSoc, we've doubled our membership. We currently sit at 1,140 paying members, and 6,742 total, including associates. Those numbers are as at the end of November. They're still small. They're still very small relative to the sea of individual investors that's out there, and we still have a lot of work to do to increase the penetration that ShareSoc has. But there are other measures of success, not least the way in which both companies, government bodies, press, financial services react when we communicate with them. And we've noticed a very strong change in that reaction over the last couple of years, which we take as a vindication of what we're doing. I'm going to move now to the Stan Grierson Award, annual award. Stan was my predecessor as chairman of ShareSoc, and we have mark our remembrance of him. He unfortunately passed away a couple of years back, with an annual award for somebody who has done sterling service for ShareSoc. This year, the winner, you've already heard his name mentioned, is Danny Wallace. Danny is a serial volunteer, has done fantastic work for ShareSoc in the past, has really latched into the Signet merger process, is single-handedly responsible for the majority of the after meetings that Signet operates, and is a delight to work with. So I know he's in the audience today. Danny, many congratulations. There is a cup here at my house, which is getting dustier and dustier and more tarnished, which is yours for the year, and which will bear your name. Congratulations. I should also mention on the way through that there was another name that was in the frame, which was Paul Anscombe. Paul is responsible for the Sirius Claim Group. What we did on Sirius was effectively support the shareholders, and there is the potential of a legal claim process coming out of that activity, and Paul is looking after that process, and so he deserves a special mention on the way through. I'm going to move now to questions and answers. The Q&A box is available to you. I have only one question so far, which is, will ShareSoc take up the issues from the Lloyds TSB takeover HBOS in 2008, as soon as the solicitors have reported back to the claimants in Sharp versus Blank and others on the consequences of the judge's decision? I have to tell you that that is not front and center on our radar at the moment, but I'm very happy to make sure that it is sensibly looked at. Our approach generally to things that to legal processes and to investor issues is multifaceted. We need to look at whether or not we feel that investors have been hurt, which I think is clear in this case. Whether or not, but more importantly, whether or not there is an outcome that is positive and achievable for investors through our involvement. So sometimes we look at something and we simply say there is no capacity for us to change an outcome here. We can help, we can facilitate, we can advise, but performing a campaign is something that we do after a lot of thought, with a specific focus on whether or not that campaign is going to achieve the objectives we set for it. What are those objectives, and are they achievable? In terms of the Lloyds HBOS, Cliff, if I may ask you to take that under your wing and keep an eye on it and develop a ShareSoc response to it, and to the questioner and others with similar questions. The simplest way to ensure that something's on our radar screen is to bring it to our attention, and you can do that through me, you can do that through Cliff at any time. We do get quite a lot of member inquiries about things which have happened to them as shareholders and where they feel aggrieved, and we do our best to take a look at them and see whether or not these are things that we can usefully become involved in.
Can I just add, Mark, that we do very rarely do campaigns. We have to really feel that it's a very, very big issue here, and that's really why we've taken on board the EDGE campaign last year, where 3 of the directors were voted off and then reappointed. That was a serious case of underperforming VCT, and Sirius, where there were a lot of issues which were and a lack of communication with investors, having possibly over communicated in the past. Woodford is an obvious scandal which deserves our attention. But in the HBOS case and Lloyds, this is a long-running saga. For those who are listening in, this goes back to the 2008 takeover of HBOS by Lloyds, which was rushed through with what's the word about haste? It was certainly rushed through, and there's questions about whether proper due diligence was done. And then there was a rights issue, a huge one, and the judge in the question was talking about the specific case of Sharp and others versus Blank, and others, Blank being the chairman at the time. The judge said in his summary, "I consider the circular should have disclosed the existence of the ELA facility, not in terms such as would excite damaging speculation, but in terms which indicated its existence," unquote. And he went on and made a lot of damning statements. However, he was not able to actually make a judgment against these individuals. So they seem to have got off scot-free. And this is a serious problem. And the FCA have taken a ridiculously long time to deal with this, and they have not been able to actually prosecute anybody or persecute anybody. We do have regular meetings with the FCA, and we continue to make these points about the need for them to be more effective and to do things quicker. So we certainly will raise Mr. Johnson's point with them when we next meet them. I doubt whether we'll get very far, but we keep on making these points. Mark Northway has outlined the criteria for our campaigns. I think there's little chance of success in this case. There's quite a good blog on the website which Roger Lawson wrote in the middle of the year. It's well worth looking at if anybody's interested. But the other thing to say to Mr. Johnson and everybody else is that if you've got a concern like this, please do write into us. And sometimes the best way is to actually write a blog, and then we'll publish the blog. We're always looking for more material on our blogs and on our newsletter. This is exactly the sort of issue we like to have written about. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Cliff. I see no further questions, which is good news for timing. I'm going to leave the Q&A box open, so people are more than welcome to type questions as we proceed through the polling process. But that is where I'm going to move now, and I'm going to start, as is traditional, with Resolution 1. Which is to, and actually before I do that, I should welcome David Strader, who's joined us in the meantime. So you have one more director in front of you. Resolution number 1 is to receive the report and accounts of the Board of Directors for the year ended 31st of December 2019. I'm going to leave these open for 20 seconds each, which means that I think, well, actually leave it for a few seconds longer so I can see people are still voting. We're now 70% voted. Any more? Okay, if we could close that poll, please, Amanda. So I have 22 for, 0 against, and 1 abstain. And from the proxies received, excluding duplicates, I have another 8, which means that is approved with 30 votes for and 1 abstention. Thank you very much. If we can move to the second resolution, please, which is to re-elect as member of the board, Mr. Mark Bentley. Always a popular one, Mr. Bentley. Okay, we seem to stabilize at 70% voted. So, oh no, we're still going. Thank you, Amanda, if you could stop the poll. I have 24 for Mark Bentley, 0 against and 0 abstentions. That adds to 8 non-duplicative proxies, which makes 32 for, no against, no abstentions. Thank you, Amanda. If I could have next poll, please. Resolution 3 is to re-elect as a member of the board Mr. Mike Dennis. I see the fingers are getting more agile. I think we can stop now. Thank you. and I have 24 votes for. I have 0 against, and I have 0 abstentions. To those 24, I add 8, which takes 8 proxies, which takes me to 32 again. Thank you very much. If I could move to resolution 4, please. Resolution 4 is to re-elect as member of the board Mr. Paul de Gruchy. And if we can close the poll, please. I have 23 for Paul de Gruchy, 0 against, 0 abstentions, and again 8 proxies, which takes me to 31 votes for Paul, none against, and no abstentions. Thank you very much. Resolution 5, please, Mr. Mark Lauber. To re-elect as member of the board, Mr. Mark Carl Lauber. There's a late one there. If we could close the poll, please. And I have 22 for Mark Lauber. I have 0 against, and I have 1 abstention. There are 8 proxy votes for, which takes me to 34, 0 against, and 1 abstention. Number 6, traditionally I would now hand the chairmanship of the meeting to someone else, but I think logistically, given the virtual nature, I'm going to, if you don't mind, stay in the seat. But this is to re-elect as a member of the board, Mr. Mark Alistair Northway, myself. Thank you. I think we can close that now. I have 27 for, 0 against, and 0 abstentions, to which I need to add 7, taking me to 34 for, 0 against, but 1 abstention. Thank you very much, Roger Lawson. That's a traditional one from Roger. Thank you. I'm going to move now to resolution 7, please, which is for Chris Spencer Phillips, to re-elect as member of the board, Mr. Christopher Tyrrell Spencer Phillips. Chris has been a real stalwart this year. He's seen, as you will note from the neck brace, he's been in the wars, but he's been a consistent supporter of ShareSoc and very active despite his tribulations. Thank you, Chris. And I think we can stop that. Thank you. And we have 26 votes for Chris. I have 7 here, which takes me to 33 for, 0 against, and 0 abstentions. Number 8 resolution, please, is for Mr. David Stredder. To re-elect as member of the board, Mr. David Stredder. And I think we can close that, please. And I have 27 votes for, 0 against and 0 abstentions. To that 27, I need to add 8, taking me to 35, the winner. For, 0 abstentions, 0 against and 0 abstentions. So that is passed. Resolution number 9 is to re-elect as member of the board Mr. Clifford John Waite, please. That seems to be stable. I think we can stop the poll there. Thank you. I have 27 votes for Cliff, to which I have to add 8, taking me to 35. Joint winner so far. 0 against and 0 abstentions. Resolution 10, to re-elect as member of the board Mr. Raymond Douglas Williams, please. Thank you very much. I have 27 for, I have 1 against and no abstentions. And from the proxy process, I have 8, taking me again to 35 for, 1 against and 0 abstentions. Resolution 11 is to re-elect as member of the board Mrs. Karen Schulte, and my apologies that she's not available today. That's my fault in terms of scheduling rather than hers. Thank you. I have 26 for, to which I need to add 7, taking me to 33 for. I have 0 against, and I have 1 abstention online and 1 abstention by proxy. That's 2 abstentions. So 33 for, 0 against, and 2 abstentions. Resolution 12 is to re-elect as a member of the board Ms. Penelope Ann Shepherd, Penny Shepherd, please. Thank you very much. Oh, 1 popped in there at the last minute. So I have 26 for, to which I had to add 7 proxies for, taking me to 33. I have 0 abstentions, and I have, sorry, 0 against, apologies. And I have 1 abstention on screen and 1 abstention via proxy, making me 2 exceptions. So 33 for, 0 against, 2 abstentions. Resolution 13 is to re-elect as member of the board Mr. Amit Vedara. Thank you very much. I have 25 for votes on screen, and I have 7 away, taking me to 32 votes for. I have no votes against, and I have 2 abstentions on screen, and I have 1 abstention via proxy, making me 3. So 32 for, 0 against, and 3 abstentions. Resolution 14 I'm just going to discuss that very briefly. So, Resolution 14 relates to the remuneration policy or remuneration report. Under the Articles of Society, the directors may be remunerated for their services and for expenses incurred in attending board meetings or otherwise in connection with services they undertake. During the year ended 31st of December 2019, no remuneration was paid to any director for their services as a director, and no expenses were paid for attending board meetings, with the exception of Penny Shepherd, whose travel expenses were reimbursed, and that was by prior agreement before she joined as a director. For 2020, the board does not propose to pay any remuneration to the directors for acting as director, although it has been specifically agreed that the Society will cover Penny Shepherd's travel expenses in relation to attending physical board meetings, which has not been the issue for most of the year. Directors' out-of-pocket expenses will be reimbursed where the chairman considers it justifiable to do so. During 2019, the board authorised payments totaling £3,067 in recruitment fees to First Flight, a recruitment company associated with Chris Spencer Phillips, in relation to the recruitment of new directors, and that was substantially below the market costs of that activity, that service. During 2019, the board authorised payment of £600 to Mark Bentley in relation to specification and project management of the second phase of website development, and that was a specific agreement because we required Mark's services at a point where he was very resource strapped in terms of time, and we agreed to a specific one-off payment there. During 2019, ShareSoc paid £2,040 to Daniel Stredder, who is the son of David Stredder, for marketing assistance. And ShareSoc cooperates with Mello, which is a commercial organisation operated by David Stredder. Hopefully that makes very clear the extent of the financial benefits available to directors for being involved in ShareSoc. I have also included in this year's financial report, which you have a copy of, details of the breakdown, which I'm not required to distribute and which I'm not required to lodge with Companies House. I've done both specifically to ensure that it is clear how much, or in this case, how little of the revenues of ShareSoc is ending up in any director's pockets. I do that because I'm aware of a degree of noise that occurred behind paywalls on certain websites last year, suggesting that perhaps this was a beanie for directors, when in fact it's precisely the opposite. This is very much about directors putting input, providing a huge amount of input for no remuneration, rather than directors receiving remuneration for little input, just for clarity. With that background, those of you, if I could ask those of you who haven't voted on Resolution 14 to do so now, that would be fantastic, please. Thank you, and I think we can close that now. So I have 24 for, to which I have to add 8, taking me to 32 positives. I have 0 against, and I have 3 abstentions in the live poll. So 32 for, 0 against, and 3 abstentions. Thank you very much. That brings us to the end of the formal proceedings. I would just like to underline, and I see no further questions, I'd like to underline, we've done this slightly on purpose to make it crystal clear to anybody who thinks otherwise, that it is possible for companies to run an AGM process where the information is provided to their investors before the AGM, where there is the opportunity to ask questions, where there is the opportunity to hear responses to those questions before voting, and then there is the responsibility, there's the opportunity to vote live at the AGM. We have seen continued erosion of shareholders' rights by the misuse, in our view, of regulation changes around AGM processes for 2020 as a result of COVID. There is no excuse for not doing it properly. And it is a critical part of shareholder governance. It's a critical part of the checks and balances that operate across boards of directors. It can be done. The technology exists, and going forward, it can be done much better. We would sincerely hope that the AGM processes for companies going forward adopt a hybrid approach, where it is possible for investors to attend and to ask questions, to attend remotely, to attend physically and ask questions, to attend remotely and ask questions, and to vote on items once they have heard responses to their questions, ideally within the same meeting. On that note, I'm going to thank you all very much indeed for attending. I'm going to thank my co-directors again very much for their assistance and support during the year. I'm going to thank the staff that assist us in this process, which include Amanda, which includes Angela, which includes Sandra, for their fantastic help during the year. And again, to Lord Lee, I'm going to thank for his support. But the fundamental driver of this is membership. So I'd like to close with a thank you to all members for their continued support. Thank you very much indeed.